conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, we'll do one of my favorite pastimes. We'll dig into the contracts that our state legislature's contract review committee had looked through this month, what they approved, and just look into what our state is spending money on. And it does give us some insight into how our legislators exactly think when it comes to how the state is spending our money. Also, the Kentucky Democrats post a video of Jacqueline Coleman and attached to it a commentary that indicates that, well, you should not support school choice, despite the fact that what Jacqueline Coleman said is exactly the argument that pro-school choice arguers, people who support, would make. We'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But before we dig down into it, there was a major Supreme Court case that more on the national level I want to touch upon because it does have some ramifications on down the line. So we will be digging into that first as well. But before I get to that story, please make sure you head on over to theandrewshow.com and hit the Listen Now tab. For those of you listening to the show, maybe on WBNA 21 or elsewhere, well, this is a show that occurs Monday through Friday in an audio format. This year is the only video episode we do of the week. But if you want to listen to the audio only episode, head on over to theandrewshow.com and hit the Listen Now tab. It'll show you all the different places where you can take a listen and stay up to date on exactly everything that's going on here in Kentucky. And as always, if you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Now, let's get down into it. So there's a big Supreme Court case ruling that was issued over the weekend, and it was the Chevron deference overturning. This 1984 court precedent, aptly 1984, funny, essentially said that a regulatory agency could make reasonable regulations. For those of you who didn't see me, I just did the old air quotes there. Reasonable regulations on issues that Congress hasn't weighed in on or been clear on. Essentially giving the executive agencies the ability to go ahead and create regulations, essentially law, that Congress themselves has never actually passed laws on. And so our judiciary, our Supreme Court, was hearing this case involving some fishermen, anglers, professional fishermen, commercial fishermen. So they wouldn't be anglers, commercial fishermen, that were having to pay nearly $710 a day to the USDA programs to monitor their fishing activities, to monitor how many fish they're bringing in. Are they overfishing, underfishing, monitoring the fishing habitat? And so these ships were having to dole out $700 a day just to pay for the regulators to follow the regulations. And so they had sued in court saying that this regulation was overburdensome and Congress had never made a law about this. And so therefore that agency shouldn't be able to just go ahead and charge them $710 for their staffing when, well, Congress never said that was okay. And the Supreme Court has ruled with them that nope, agencies cannot just pass regulations unless Congress has weighed in on it. Now, what's funny is when we're hearing from the left, is they're claiming that this is a move by the conservative courts to shift more power to the judiciary. Quite simply, the ruling here indicates that judges need to hear it case-by-case basis and look to see if laws have been made on it. And the left is trying to make this claim that's about giving more power to the judiciary in order to back up their argument on packing the courts, in order to back up their argument on just how awful our Supreme Court is, the Supreme Court put together by Trump. But really what the Supreme Court did here was not give itself more power. It didn't give the judiciary more power. If anything, it just demanded that Congress do its job. Now, I get it. Sometimes it's really hard to get Congress to do something, to make a law, to do what you want them to do. Whether you're on the left or the right, it's an arduous and hard process and task. But it was always supposed to be. See, that's what our founders envisioned. Not that there would be these quick knee-jerk reactions, not that one person in the White House or a few different regulatory bodies could just go ahead and make regulations, rules, laws that affect vast amounts of the American people. I mean, in this case, the regulations that we see a lot of times coming out of places like the EPA, USDA, FDA, I mean, they affect your health, your food, they affect, obviously, the cost of heating and cooling your home, energy. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, at one point we saw the Biden administration trying to put a moratorium on evictions, basically negating private contracts under the guise of course, COVID. But, well, that was a stretch too far. The Supreme Court ruled. And so the left is hopping mad about this. They said, you mean to tell me we can't just do regulations anymore? We have to actually make laws through Congress? Congress that doesn't want to make laws because if they did something, they might get in trouble. You see, get in trouble with their base. You see, here's the thing that I think our founders missed, right? Our founders always wanted power to check power, that the desire for power out of congressmen would check the power out of the senators, the desire for power out of the senators would check congressmen, desire of power for both parts of the legislative branch would check the power of the executive, the powers of those two would check judiciary, vice versa. Power would check power. But what they failed to understand, or what they missed, was that people would find power just from being in the office, not by making laws. They never imagined that having to give up your work for several months on end in order to go to Congress and make laws ever so often. They were never supposed to be like this full-time body either, as we see now. Well, they never thought that would be something people would really want to do. And most importantly, they never thought it would be something that people would find a whole lot of enjoyment from. They always figured people locally felt power by being an employer or by having a lot of people that you're doing business with, being well known in the community, being respected in the community. But instead, people find power from just being in the office. And a part of just being in the office means you don't want to do much, because the less you do, the less you can get attacked for. If you don't do anything, it's never your fault. And largely the constituents of these Congress people agree. So that's why Congress and Senate have not wanted to really pass these laws. They wanted to leave it to the federal government. Just go ahead and make those regulations. And so that way, if they got upset the president, they got upset the president, but the Congress people could put their hands up and say, no, it's that other person. It's that other person. Well, it is Contract Review Committee met this month here in Kentucky. And for those of you who are unaware, there's several different kinds of committees. You have standing committees that meet only during session and take action on bills. Then you have interim committees, which is essentially those standing committees meeting once monthly together, both the Senate and the House, versions of that coming together to meet once a month to hear about things that they oversee in order to prepare and put together laws for the upcoming session. So they're not just coming into the session starting from scratch, but actually they have some information going into it of what they want to try to accomplish, they believe. But then there's also something called statutory committees. And one of those committees is the Government Contract Review Committee, a legislative committee that looks at any contract being issued by the state and has a little bit of a ceremonial approving of them. Now, what are the limitations of this group? What can they actually do and not do? And what are some of the contracts they looked at? Well, that'll be something that we'll be discussing after this break. We're coming up on it. You're watching the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. As I said before, if you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com and head on over to theandrewshow.com. Hit the contact tab or hit the listen now tab if you want to see old shows, new shows, you want to follow the show. And of course, hit the contact tab if you want to reach out. We'll be back in a few short minutes. Are you a product, service, or business trying to reach conservative Kentuckians? Well, the Andrew Cooperrider Show can be exactly what you're looking for. Unlike anything else out there, the Andrew Cooperrider Show reaches conservative Kentuckians statewide through radio, TV, podcasting, social media, as well as email. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show to see if we have a marketing package that fits your budget. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show at theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. You can hit the contact tab, or you can also email the Andrew Cooperrider Show at info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Let's be the marketing solution that your business has been looking for. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So the Government Contract Review Committee is a legislative committee that meets once a month to go through and approve, putting that in quotations, explain in a second, contracts that our executive branch is doing. Now, of course, those who know the separation of powers within our state and federal government, of course, same way, know that the legislative branch is the main branch of appropriation, of spending. They're in charge of the budget. They can dictate how money is spent within the state. And so the Contract Review Committee is an arm of that, where they hear from the executive branch on contracts that they want to approve or disapprove. Now, the way this works is they hear a contract and they can either vote to approve it or not approve it. Now, if they vote to approve it, well, nothing happens. It just moves forward like normal. But if they vote to turn it down, well, then it now turns over to, for some reason, the finance cabinet head to go ahead and override their decision, to basically veto their decision on spending. Now, the legislators, they can't do anything about it there until session starts up. So if they disapprove a contract and then it's vetoed by the finance cabinet here in Kentucky, well, the contract moves forward anyways until legislative session. Come legislative session, well, the Contract Review Committee could put forward a list of all the contracts they want to see struck down, and there could just be one simple bill passed with a list of those contracts saying that the executive branch is not to spend any money on those items. But so often, well, the legislative branch doesn't do that. You know, there was some talk, and it's currently, I believe, being felt out in the courts, of shifting that veto power over from the finance cabinet head over to the treasurer's office so somebody else could veto it. A lot of this to say, well, you know, this power belongs to the executive when we're out of session of how they want to make policy and spend money. So the legislative branch, when not in session, can't do anything to stop the state from how they're spending. And so we're going to kick this over to somebody else who's currently a Republican, the treasurer's office, in order to be a check. So that way it's another check on the governor. And I do support that. But realistically speaking, they wouldn't actually need to do that if the legislators just had the guts, you know, to go ahead and actually follow through. When they say they don't like a contract, if they bothered to vote to end that contract, you wouldn't have to worry about who's vetoing it, because everybody would know, well, here in a few months, that contract's going to be disallowed anyway, so we need to be careful about what they're doing. For an example, this happened over the last interim year. There was a push by some to defund the head of the DEI department at KDE, one Dr. Tucker. And by the way, he's paid $160,000 a year. That's right, $160,000 a year. And the legislature could have passed a bill simply stating that that office is to be defunded. There's to be no diversity, equity, and inclusion offices at the Kentucky Department of Education. You are not to continue to employ this individuals in this roles, and you're not to spend this money on this anymore. But of course, our legislature, being full of spineless Republicans in name only, went ahead and didn't do anything about it. In fact, they left it in place. So they do have options. Anytime you hear legislators claim when you complain to them about these contracts, oh, you know, we can't do anything about it, which so often happens, because longtime listeners of the show will know that I dig into these contracts probably once a month or so in the off session, especially when they're not in session. I'll go through the contracts every month and pull out some that I think is of interest, that I think the people of Kentucky need to hear about. But legislators, when you complain to them about it, and a lot of people have, I know what they say back to you, because I get calls from them too, telling me like, hey, you know, we can't do anything about it. But that is not an acceptable answer, because they're lying. They can do something about it. The minute they get back into session, they could go ahead and just vote to end those contracts. But putting that to the side. So what did they look at here? Okay, well, much of the contracts that go through get passed through without any questions at all. No digging in, no scrutiny. Here's an example of one that probably should get some questions asked about, is this a good use of funds? Because not all of it is necessarily the wrong thing to do. I'm not saying the state shouldn't be doing these things or not doing these things, but it's about how much they're spending on it. For an example, here's a contract paying what appears to be an occupational therapist $85,000 a year to work 26 hours a week, 35 weeks a year. Now, for those of you who aren't good at math, don't worry. I've already done it for us here. That works out to about $93 an hour for an occupational therapist. Now, according to True Care, the average pay of an occupational therapist in Kentucky is about $40 an hour, specifically $39.10 an hour. So less than half of what the state is paying for an occupational therapist is the going rate for an occupational therapist here in Kentucky. Now, granted, there is a difference between a contract worker and a person working directly for the state. For an example, you don't have taxes, health insurance, all those other kinds of benefits that you have to pay for. So your true cost of paying somebody $39.10 an hour might be closer to $50 or $60 an hour, but that is exponentially less than paying $93 an hour for the same job. $93 an hour. And yet nobody asks, hey, is that what we should be spending money on? Is that a good use of funds exactly? Or is there a way we could get this down? Why does this cost so much? That kind of analysis doesn't go into hardly any of this, despite the fact that they're legislators and they're being paid to do this. You know, they are a quote unquote part-time legislator, but keep in mind, our average legislator gets paid like 60, 70-ish K a year, and they get paid extra money in their off time to do these types of committee hearings. And so we should expect them to do things like research the contracts before them, but so often they don't bother to ask the question. But sometimes they do ask questions, and it is pretty interesting to hear what they have to say. And sometimes they even ask a good question, but then they lack the follow through to actually do something about it. Even a ceremonial do something, even if they claim that, well, this committee's opinion really doesn't matter. Well, you can at least do the ceremonial side of things then, but a lot of times they won't even do that. And here's a perfect example. So under the Economic Development Cabinet, we have something called the startup hubs. Okay, these are these groups in different regions. There's the Central Region Innovation and Commercialization Center in Bowling Green, Shaping Our Appalachia out of Pikeville, Blue North out of Northern Kentucky, Awesome Inc. out of Lexington, Amplify out of Louisville, and Sprocket out in Paducah. And these are supposed to be like miniature, Silicon Valley hub type things where tech startups and other company startups can go there to go ahead and get funding and get help starting up those organizations. That was the idea behind it. These formed like back in, I think 2001, 2002, to basically try to bring the IT technology jobs to Kentucky and also bring that kind of startup thought process. Now, a lot of this startup thought process, by the way, for those of you unaware of what this entire ecosystem is like for startups, a lot of it's a bunch of baloney. I mean, the way they find value in things is crazy. What they like or dislike is crazy. What people dump money into is crazy. For an example, you have companies like Lyft and Uber and others that have either never made a profit or have never really made substantial profits, ongoing profits, but yet are worth billions upon billions of dollars. And the way they make their money as companies are able to survive is by fundraising and selling stock, the perceived value. And in much the same way that the perceived value there a lot of times is a fugazi, it's fake, it's not real, because the company on paper doesn't even make money, and you can't even exactly see a path forward to them making money. For example, Twitter. Before Elon took over, what was their path to making money? They weren't laying it out. But it was fine. People were fine to continue to buy stock and give them money to continue this road of non-profitability. Really, Twitter should have been worth basically nothing, but because of how the stock market works, because of how our business communities a lot of times think, for some reason, it was worth billions upon billions of dollars. So, in the same way that those are fake, well, a lot of times what these places are actually accomplishing is fake, is a fugazi. or is there to go ahead and line the pockets of private citizens? A lot of times what you'll see in these innovation centers is the owners and the people involved within these centers, like a Central Region Initiative and Commercialization Center, Shaping Our Appalachia, Blue North, Awesome Inc., Amplify, and Sprocket, is that the people who head up those organizations also own private for-profit companies that provide services to startups. For an example, you may see one of these companies own something like a software development company. And so what happens is they take our tax dollars to go ahead and help a startup go ahead and fundraise and get together and start rolling towards whatever they need to produce into the future. But a part of them helping them fundraise and using our tax dollars to pay for the individuals. See, that's a key there. They're not using their own money to help drive money into these companies. They're using our tax dollars to pay for individuals' salaries whose job it is to put money into these companies. Then they have these companies turn around and hire their for-profit entities to do the work on their business. Accounting firms, like I said, software development companies. So you come to them with a startup that's an app, and you go ahead and say, hey, I've got this app I want to put together and build. They'll say, great, let's refer you over to this for-profit entity we own. And when you bring in that startup funds, you spend it there, lining our pockets. That's really what a lot of these places are doing. But despite that, these startup hubs cost the taxpayer at least $3 million a year, actually more than that. We'll go into what their questions were about these startup hubs and the answers, because those are fascinating too as well. After this short break, we're coming up on it. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll be back in a few short minutes.
Lexington Overstock Warehouse is Central Kentucky's best source for stylish new home furnishings. Don't pay retail. With our low overhead operating structure and big name brands, we offer the absolute best values on new furniture for every room. Shop online anytime at LexingtonOverstockWarehouse.com or visit our weekends only showroom located at 156 West Tiverton Way. Right now, for listeners of this show, we're offering a special discount for our online customers. Use coupon code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your online order today. Lexington Overstock Warehouse, low overhead equals really low prices.
And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. For the break, we're digging into the Contract Review Committee, which was looking at these startup hubs, these private entities that are not profits, that also own for-profit entities that make money off the industry. And what they're there to do is to help people start up these tech companies and to help technology and innovation in the area. And right now, they cost the taxpayers, at least in this contract reviews that they were looking at, they're paying out around $3 million a year across these 6 different companies out of 6 different regions to help facilitate this startup stuff. But this isn't actually the only taxpayer funds these places get. They also will receive funds for a number of other things. For an example, one of the things that we see them receiving money for is this program the Beshear Administration put together in order to help underrepresented minorities in business. So basically, taking taxpayer dollars from everyone, you, me, and then going ahead and funneling that to people based upon simply their skin color. And we've been paying them out millions a year in order to do specifically that, help underrepresented people. So obviously, yours truly need not apply as a white guy. But regardless, straight white guy. But regardless, they did have some questions, and this is a little different. Normally, our legislators would let this kind of stuff go through. Economic development for them, they hardly ever seem to ask the important questions on exactly why are we doing this and what are we getting for it, right? I mean, there were other contracts in the economic development that didn't get asked about. For an example, there's a contract here on economic development for $1.1 million to represent the Commonwealth of Kentucky in Europe, and another contract for $700,000 to represent the Commonwealth of Kentucky in China and Asia and other countries within the Asian area. $700,000, 1.1, nearly $2 million in order to represent Kentucky. And nobody can answer what the ROI is on these types of things. In fact, Senator Meredith did actually ask the Economic Development Cabinet about these startup HUDs contract, this $3 million contract. He did have some questions for them. Now, most of the questions actually had to deal with the allocations of funds. They didn't like the fact that certain areas were getting more and certain areas were getting less. Obviously, the legislators all represent different areas. They want to bring home the bacon. But there was a good question asked in there by Meredith about what is the return on investment? Are we actually getting something as a Commonwealth, as a state, out of dumping millions upon millions upon millions of dollars every year into these private-run companies? Well, let's hear what the person in charge of the program, let's hear exactly what she had to say when asked about ROI. Take a listen.
Can you calculate an ROI for each office?
Thank you for that question. We have not calculated an ROI for each office. We do calculate the total amount of investment that goes into small business for each office. But of course, it's a little bit more difficult because the businesses that they work with are very diverse, and we encourage it.
Now, an FYI for those who just watched the video, I don't take the video. That's LRC taking the video. So when you see the black screen for a bit, that's just LRC's video quality kind of sucks. But the most important thing to take away there is the head of this, she couldn't answer the question of what is our return on investment. When it comes to spending millions of taxpayer funds, if you can't answer the question, what are the taxpayers getting out of this? Keep in mind, they've been now spending money on this for something like 23 years, and they still can't tell you whether or not this is actually something that the taxpayers are getting a return on their money on. This is how you know the government should never be using terms like investing and investors. Because, well, quite frankly, they really don't care. Because even after that question, and after you heard her response, now, any normal human being, especially one who calls themselves a conservative, after being told, yeah, continue giving us millions, oh, you want to know what your return on investment is? I don't know. That's too hard to answer. Not worth tracking. We're just the economic development cabinet. We're just supposed to know exactly how we're developing the economy through each of our initiatives. Could we be achieving the same growth without spending as much? That would be an interesting question to answer, but of course, not one they're interested in answering. So any real conservative, any real Republican, you think, would immediately vote no, would vote these contracts down, be like, until you can tell us what our return on investment is on these things, how much money are we as a state making in tax revenues? Is this paying for itself, or is this a waste of money? We're not going to approve it. Now, granted, if it was me, I wouldn't approve any types of these economic development programs where we're giving money out to privately run organizations and companies that they're then in turn using to line their pockets. But putting that to the side, if this is something you're for and you still call yourself a Republican, you should at least say, until we get an ROI answer, not getting it. But that's not what happened. In fact, every single person, including Senator Meredith, who asked the question that didn't get answered, is this a good use of our money, went ahead and voted yes to continuing to give millions of dollars to these companies. And that brings up other things that they really should be asking questions about, but they fail to. And it makes you wonder what their motivations are. For an example, one of the contracts we see, and we see these ever so often, this isn't the only contract Frost Brown Todd gets. Frost Brown Todd's a lawyer firm, right? But they also do lobbying. But so often we see them getting contracts from the state tax dollars, to go ahead and do various legal and consulting services for the state. In this case, we see this month they received just a cool $50,000 from the state for their legal services. But what's interesting about Frost Brown Todd is they're one of the largest lobbyists in the state. In fact, their head of lobbying, just one of their lobbyists, Trey Grayson, got paid $160,000 so far this year in lobbying fees, just by companies to lobby. $160,000 a year. And those of you who understand how this lobbying works, they pay for lunches, they pay for dinners, they pay for golf outings, they pay for all these things to make the legislators feel special. But then in turn, those legislators are then approving contracts where their companies are getting paid to do other things. It's a weird cycle, isn't it? So they're paid to lobby people, and they use that money to make them feel special, and to give them things for free, like, shows and all kinds of different perks. And then in turn, they then get paid by you, the taxpayer, approved by the same people that they're lobbying to do other things. And sometimes it's not just legal services. I mean, speaking of lobbying here, taxpayer-funded lobbying especially, here's another contract that leaves you scratching your head. This is a WKU, Western Kentucky University contract, to spend almost $70,000 on a lobbyist for 1 year, a lobbying firm called the Commonwealth Alliance, to lobby the legislature. So right there, the legislature, a committee of the legislature is approving a contract to go ahead and pay a lobbyist to lobby them. They're approving the pay of the person who's supposed to lobby them. What is this weird cycle we're on? It's like a hamster running in a hamster wheel. This is absolutely insane. We literally have our legislators approving contracts for people who are paid then to do things for them to make them feel special. Absolutely ridiculous. And that's not to imagine too, as well, the desire to be liked. These lobbyists are the closest thing you'll find to friends a lot of times in Frankfurt. Of course, they want something from you, just like every bad friend does. And so you want to continue being liked. So of course, you're going to continue to approve those contracts. It's no wonder that these pass with flying colors, with nobody ever asking any questions at all of exactly if this is a good use of funds or not. It's truly not shocking. Well, coming up after this, we see a public-private partnership in Louisville taking over economic development. Speaking of economic development corruption, we'll go over that. And then as well, the Kentucky Democrats tweet out a video that, well, at least you think they're coming out supporting school choice, but for some reason they've tied it into not supporting school choice. Weird situation. We'll have all that and more after this short break. Listen up, my fellow business owners, because I got to tell you about a business that's incredibly important to any company's operations, and that's Amston, A-M-P-S-T-U-N, Amston. It's out of Richmond, Kentucky, and they provide cybersecurity for commercial businesses, and they've got dozens of years of experience working with government and private entities alike. So reach out to Amston today. That's A-M-P-S-T-U-N.com, A-M-P-S-T-U-N, Amston. Reach out to them today. Tell them Andrew sent you over. And you're back here in this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. The mask is coming off in Louisville on about what economic development is all about. Last two segments, I really went over just some of the money being spent on economic development and how it's, they can't even answer basic questions like ROIs. Well, because what it's really about is just people in government doing favors to their donors. That's what it's really about. It's a common joke and phrase we hear online all the time of people saying, well, we should just go ahead and make our politicians wear NASCAR jackets with the sponsors of all the people who's giving them money right there on the jacket, so at least we can explain some of their voting behavior. Well, in Louisville, they apparently are deciding to just go ahead and get it over with now. Because what they have going on their economic development side of things is they now have a public-private partnership taking over the role of the Office of Economic Development in Louisville. Now, they claim that they plan for this to be self-sustaining, but we know they're lying, of course, because when asked when it will become self-sustaining, their answer is, I don't know. Eventually, perhaps, maybe. You'll have to wait and see. Because, well, that's government for you. They don't actually care whether or not it becomes self-sustaining. What they care about is the fact that they're going to go ahead and just cut out the middleman, let you all see exactly who's making the decisions on economic development, because it isn't politicians and it isn't experts, it's companies. And that's who's taking over the roles here, is a lot of these privately held entities, small and big businesses, they claim. It's supposed to be around 30 people taking over this board of economic development. Of course, they've already announced places like UPS, President of Fifth Third, and others that are going to go ahead and sit on this board. And of course, there's obvious economic incentives for them to go ahead and do so, monetary incentives. For example, the area president for Fifth Third Bank. Well, they may, if somebody decides to go ahead and get their funding for their project through Fifth Third, perhaps she can go ahead and put a good word for you on the board about getting you some more of those sweet, sweet government dollars. That's a perk of doing business with Fifth Third is you go ahead and get those sweet, sweet government funds. Tastes so nice, free government money from your pocket. Well, okay, I'll go ahead and do my loan through Fifth Third. That's an example of how these companies can benefit monetarily from being on this board. And that's how influence gets bought. Now, normally it's done behind closed doors. But of course, they've decided, we'll just do it right out in the open. Because this is, at this point, what can we expect? I mean, this is how economic development has always been done. We've seen this time and time again. For an example, let's take one of the largest economic development programs that the state of Kentucky did, or monetary handouts, when they gave $410 million to the Ford battery plant. $410 million. Well, at the time that they did that, the person in charge of negotiating the deal in the economic development cabinet within Beshear's administration actually owns land right next to the property that they paid off and gave to Ford, and also owns an industrial storage business in the area. Land that skyrocketed in value, and an industrial storage business that is going to see, if not already seeing, massive growth because, well, they're right there near the plant. In fact, even the Ethics Commission went ahead and said that this guy should step down from being involved in this deal, and he just said, I'm going to do it anyways. That's what we see all the time. So the question is this a good move for the people or not? I mean, really, they're just taking the mask off. They're just leaving us with a choice. I mean, do you want these deals done behind closed doors and you to wonder about them? Or, you know what, we can just do them out in the open for you. And so that way you don't have to wonder about it. And that way, too, we don't have to be as secretive. A lot of times the cover-up is worse than the crime. And so if we could just go ahead and stop doing the cover-ups because you all just accept the fact that we're just a bunch of corrupt people and politicians. And, I mean, we're just looking for what everybody's looking for, right? To line our pockets as much as we can for money we don't have to work for. So, might as well just get you used to seeing it out in the open. It's real nice. I mean, at least we know who the culprits are, right? That's real nice. So the Democrats here in Kentucky Democrats, went ahead and made a post of a video, and they have this caption on that says, "This fall, don't just vote to support Kentucky's public schools, vote for the candidates who are committed to defending them." I'm going to go ahead and play the video of Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman, exactly what she had to say here. Take a listen.
Because what we all know about the work that we do, the things that we care about, the values that we have, is to build that better Kentucky requires us to make sure that every child, no matter their zip code, have the best opportunity they can have at a brighter future, to be able to play a role in that economy that Governor Beshear gets up and works to build every single day. The future of that economy is in our classrooms today.
No matter their zip code, everybody deserves the same educational opportunities. That's right. Jacqueline Coleman is now trying to co-opt what is typically pro-school choice arguments, and then the Democrats are taking that to make it an anti-school choice argument. Somehow, they're stating that trapping people in their public schools, that they're literally stuck in based upon their zip code, is somehow better for them and not going to limit their educational opportunities. No. Instead, they're taking this idea. Now, this is something school choice advocates say, to say that, look, we should give people the options to go to any school that they desire to. Public, private, doesn't matter. Whatever school works best for that family, they should get to make that decision. They shouldn't be trapped in a school based upon just where they live. That's an argument I make. That's an argument all the pro-school choice people make. Because obviously we recognize that when you have neighborhood schools that fit certain demographics, and I'm talking about socioeconomical demographics here, okay? The parents, for an example, if you've got an area where it's a lot of one-parent households, you're going to have more, just the stats, don't get mad at me, these are the facts here, just the facts. You're going to have more unruly kids who don't know how to behave. And so if you're a child stuck at that school, but you're not one of those who doesn't want to mess up and misbehave, you're one of those who actually wants to learn and do better, Well, trapping you in a school full of people who don't care, who have parents that don't care, is going to absolutely sink your opportunities. But because you have hardworking parents that maybe they can't afford private schools, and certainly they're working too hard and they can't afford to have the time to homeschool you either, so you have to go to that public school, well, they would trap you in that. They don't want to give you options or opportunities. And see, that's the real thing about school choice, why it actually helps with educational outcomes for individuals. We're not even talking about large scale necessarily. I'm talking about on an individual basis, because here's why. At the end of the day, you will at least see the same educational outcomes, if not better. Because what you have is you do have these vast amount of kids who are born to parents that just don't care. And it really doesn't matter how much money you give them for their education. It really doesn't matter how much you give to the schools in those areas. It doesn't matter how big the voucher is. If the parents don't care, the kid will do bad. The kid will get kicked out, or the kid won't learn anything. Because kids are nothing but individuals that need to be shaped and molded. And if nobody's there to shape and mold them at home, the parent, nobody's there to make sure they do their homework. Nobody's there to make sure that they take care of what they need to take care of. Nobody's there to make sure they go to school. Well, guess what? The kid's not going to go to school, period. That will be the outcome. It doesn't matter where they go. But what school choice is about is, what about those parents and kids that are trying to change their futures, that aren't acting that way? How do we not drag them down by the fact that all their peers are falling into this category? School choice gives them that opportunity to not be stuck, to be able to take advantage of the fact that they do want to do better. They do want to raise out their situation. They do want to see a difference in parents-wise and their kids. And for kids, they want to see that they can turn out better than their parents did. There are kids out there who, if given that opportunity, would flourish. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter really, and I know there's lots of stats, and school choice does lead to better educational outcomes generally overall, but my point is it really doesn't matter what the outcomes are on a macro level, on a big level. What matters is on the micro level. One, will any student be worse off? There's no evidence anywhere that school choice programs as a whole lead to the public school systems now performing much, much worse for children. And there's a whole lot of evidence out there that school choice programs do a lot to help the individual students excel and not be drugged down by their peers. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I hope you'll tune in with us tomorrow. Remember, head on over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab, subscribe to the podcast to hear every episode Monday through Friday. Until the next time, I'll be seeing you.